In the snow-choked streets of Duluth, Minnesota, where the wind off Lake Superior cut like a blade through the gray November sky of 2025, Harold Harry Lynch shuffled through the drifts, his 70-year-old frame hunched under a threadbare army overcoat, its olive drab faded to a ghostly green. The coat, a relic from his days in the Korean War, hung loosely on his gaunt shoulders, the cuffs frayed and stained with years of grime, a single tarnished pin, a purple heart, barely clinging to the lapel. Harry had been a corporal in the 1st Infantry Division, earning a Legion of Merit in 1953 for saving his squad during a brutal ambush in the frozen hills near the 38th parallel, dragging wounded men to safety under enemy fire. Now, he was a shadow in a town that had forgotten its heroes, surviving by collecting scrap metal and sleeping in an abandoned barn on the edge of town, its roof sagging under the weight of snow. Duluth had once been a bustling port, its docks alive with the hum of commerce, but the decline of industry had left it hollow, much like Harry's life. After his wife, Clara, died of cancer in 2020, a battle the VA hospital couldn't win due to underfunding, he sold their small cabin on Pine Road, giving the money to a local orphanage she'd supported. With no children or family to tether him, Harry faded into the city's margins, invisible to the bundled-up townsfolk who hurried past, their eyes averted from the old man with frost in his gray beard and a cough that rattled his chest. Each morning, he trudged to Mabel's diner on 3rd Avenue, where Mabel, a stout woman with a soft spot for strays, slipped him a cup of weak coffee when her boss wasn't looking. "Stay out of the wind, Harry," she'd say, her voice a rare kindness in his frozen world. But the cold was merciless, seeping through the holes in his boots, and the hunger that gnawed at him was matched only by the ache for warmth. By the 5th day of a blizzard that blanketed Duluth in 3 feet of snow, Harry's hands trembled as he clutched his burlap sack, the chill in his bones a cruel reminder of winters in Korea, where survival had been a daily fight. He thought of Clara, her warm smile a fading memory, and whispered her name into the wind, a plea for strength as he faced another day of scraping by in a town that had turned its back on him. The blizzard raged on as Harry stumbled toward a small lumberyard on the outskirts of Duluth, its gates locked but its yard piled high with split logs under a tarp, a beacon of warmth in the icy haze. The air was thick with the scent of pine and frost, and Harry's breath came in shallow gasps, his cough worsening with each step. He'd burned the last of his scavenged kindling 2 nights ago, and the barn where he slept offered no heat, the wind howling through its cracked walls like a living thing. His fingers, numb and cracked from the cold, brushed against the tarp as he eyed a small bundle of firewood, enough to keep him warm for a night, maybe 2. He glanced around. The yard was deserted, the owner, Mr. Carlson, likely holed up in his office across town, and the snow muffled any sound of approaching footsteps. The weight of his conscience pressed heavy, a soldier's honor clashing with the primal need to survive, but the cold was a stronger foe than morality. With shaking hands, he untied the tarp, slipping a few logs into his sack, their rough bark scraping against his frostbitten skin. He worked quickly, his heart pounding as if he were back in Korea, dodging sniper fire, but the guilt was a heavier burden than the wood. He'd barely tied the sack shut when a flashlight beam cut through the snow, followed by a shout. "Hey! Thief!" Mr. Carlson's voice was sharp, his figure looming as he stomped through the drifts, a phone already at his ear. I needed it," Harry rasped, his voice lost in the wind, but Carlson wasn't listening. "Police! Got a vagrant stealing my stock!" He barked into the phone, his eyes hard with anger. Within minutes, a squad car arrived, its lights flashing red and blue through the storm. Officers Daniel Brooks, a burly man with a no-nonsense glare, and Officer Emily Hart, whose keen eyes noticed the Purple Heart pin, stepped out. "You a vet?" Emily asked softly, her tone cutting through the tension. Harry nodded, his throat tight. "Korea. Long time ago." Emily's gaze softened, but Brooks was already reaching for his cuffs. "Doesn't change the law, sir. Let's go." As they led him away, a log slipped from the sack, rolling into the snow, a small, desperate prize for his shame. The holding cell at Duluth's police station was a frigid cube, its walls slick with condensation, the air heavy with the smell of damp concrete and despair. Harry sat on a metal bench, his overcoat draped over his shoulders like a shroud, the cold seeping into his joints despite the faint hum of a radiator in the corner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows across his gaunt face, his gray beard matted with frost, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. He pulled a faded photo of Clara from his pocket, her smile a beacon in the gloom, her eyes bright with the love they'd shared for 45 years. "I'm sorry, Clara," he whispered, his voice a rasp, the words swallowed by the cell's silence. The firewood had been logged as evidence, and Harry's cough deepened, each breath a struggle against the chill that clung to him like a second skin. He hadn't resisted the arrest, hadn't fought when the cuffs clicked around his wrists. Decades of discipline had taught him to endure, to survive. But this was a different kind of battle, one against a system that had discarded him. The other inmates in nearby cells ignored him. One, a young man with a shaved head, muttered about old drunks. But Harry didn't respond, his gaze fixed on Clara's photo, letting the insult pass like the wind. He'd faced worse: artillery barrages, frostbite, the loss of brothers in arms, and this was just another wound. Outside, the blizzard howled, piling snow against the station's windows, a white wall between Harry and the world. Officer Emily Hart couldn't shake the image of Harry's Purple Heart as she wrote up her report in the break room. She'd heard her grandfather, a Korean War vet, speak of the brotherhood forged in battle, and something in Harry's quiet dignity resonated. She sipped her coffee, glancing at Officer Brooks, who was scrolling through his phone, uninterested. "That guy, Harry Lynch, he's a vet," she said, her voice low. "We should look into him." Brooks shrugged, his tone gruff. "He stole Emily. Vet or not, doesn't change the facts." But Emily wasn't so sure. She pulled Harry's file, her fingers lingering on the sparse details. No address, no family, a few citations for vagrancy. But there was a note, honorable discharge, 1954, and a mention of a Legion of Merit. Her curiosity deepened, she sensed a story beneath the frost and hunger. She printed the file, tucking it into her bag, determined to dig deeper. Back in the cell, Harry leaned against the wall, the photo pressed to his chest, his mind drifting to the frozen hills of Korea, the snow, the screams, the men he'd saved. He'd come home a hero, but the VA had lost his records, cutting his benefits after Clara's death. The system had failed him, and now he sat here, a forgotten soldier in a forgotten war. The young inmate laughed again, tossing a crumpled napkin at Harry, who didn't flinch. "Got nothing to say, old man?" he taunted. Harry closed his eyes, whispering to Clara, "I'll make it through, love. For you." The words were a vow, a lifeline, as the snow outside buried Duluth in silence. The Duluth Municipal Court was a somber hall, its walls peeling with age, the air thick with the scent of old varnish and burnt coffee. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a harsh glow on the scuffed linoleum as Harry shuffled in on the morning of his hearing, his overcoat stiff with frost, his wrists sore from the cuffs. The room was sparsely populated, a few locals bundled in scarves, a tired clerk with a nasal voice, and a young prosecutor named Ethan Cole, whose sharp suit clashed with the courtroom's decay. Harry stood at the defendant's table on the right side, his burlap sack at his feet, feeling the weight of unseen judgment. The clerk called his case. State versus Harold Lynch, petty theft. Harry rose, his knees creaking like old timber, the murmur of the room a distant hum. Cole stepped forward, his voice clipped. "Your Honor, the defendant was caught stealing firewood from Carlson's lumberyard. He has no fixed address, no employment, and a history of loitering. The state recommends detention until trial." Judge Alice Goodwin, a woman in her late 50s with a stern demeanor and auburn hair streaked with gray, flipped through Harry's file with a practiced hand. She'd seen countless cases like this, vagrants, petty thieves, the forgotten, and was ready to move on. But as she opened the file, a small object slipped out, a tarnished Purple Heart pin, its ribbon frayed, the inscription, "Lynch, Harold J., U.S. Army," etched into the back. Alice froze, her breath catching. She looked at Harry, really looked, his ragged coat, his frostbitten hands, the hollow eyes of a man who'd given everything. 5-minute recess, she announced sharply, her voice slicing through the courtroom's hum. Cole blinked, confused, as Alice rose, clutching the pin, and retreated to her chambers. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, but no one approached Harry, no one offered comfort. He sat back down, his heart pounding, a flicker of hope battling years of despair. He'd been invisible for so long, a ghost in a town buried under snow, and now this, a pause, a moment of recognition he hadn't dared to dream of. Outside, the blizzard had eased, but the snow lay heavy, a white shroud over Duluth's streets. Alice sat at her desk, the pin in her palm, its weight pulling her back to stories her father, a Korean War medic, had told her. He'd spoken of a Corporal Lynch, a man who'd saved his squad during an ambush in 1953, dragging wounded men through a hail of bullets. Her father had come home because of Lynch, and Alice had grown up hearing his name. Now, that same man stood in her courtroom, broken by a system that had failed him. She opened his file, her hands trembling. Legion of Merit, 1953. Purple Heart, 1953. Honorable Discharge, 1954. VA benefits terminated, 2015, due to lost contact. The injustice burned her throat. How had they let him fall so far? She thought of her father, gone a decade now, his stories a tether to that war. Returning to the bench, Alice's face was set with resolve. Mr. Lynch, she said, her voice steady but heavy. This court orders an immediate review of your military records and VA status. This case is stayed pending investigation. Cole opened his mouth to object, but Alice's raised hand silenced him. I'm requesting pro bono counsel from the Veterans Legal Alliance. The room fell silent, the weight of her words a lifeline Harry hadn't expected. The news of Harry Lynch's case spread through Duluth like a warm wind cutting through the snow, reaching the diner, the church, and the VFW hall. By the next morning, the courtroom was packed, not with indifferent onlookers, but with veterans in faded caps, local activists, and a few reporters, their notebooks scribbling furiously. At the back stood 2 Army officers in dress uniforms, their medals gleaming, their faces somber. Harry shuffled in, his overcoat replaced with a borrowed jacket, his eyes wide at the crowd. Beside him stood Laura Bennett, a fierce lawyer from the Veterans Legal Alliance, her briefcase stuffed with documents. Corporal Lynch, she said, her voice steady. We're here to fight for you. Judge Alice Goodwin called the session to order, her gaze sweeping the room with quiet intensity. Laura presented Harry's military records, her voice clear, the Legion of Merit for saving his squad, the Purple Heart for wounds sustained in combat, commendations for bravery under fire. She then detailed the VA's failures, benefits cut off due to clerical errors, medical care denied, a system that had left him to freeze. This man is a hero, Your Honor, Laura concluded, and we've failed him. Ethan Cole shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence shaken. Alice turned to him. Does the state have anything to add? Cole shook his head, his voice low. The state moves to dismiss all charges, with prejudice. The gavel fell, a sharp crack that echoed through the room. The crowd rose, not in applause, but in a reverent salute, the officers at the back snapping to attention, their hands raised to Harry, who stood frozen, tears welling in his eyes. Alice leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. This court recognizes Corporal Harold Lynch as a decorated veteran, not a thief. His service will be remembered. The room hummed with emotion, a shared breath of gratitude, as Harry felt the weight of his past lift. Outside, the snow glistened under a weak sun, casting a silver glow over Duluth's rooftops. Emily Hart approached Harry, her smile warm. I knew there was more to you, she said, handing him a thermos of coffee from Mabel's. The community stirred, veterans offered support, a local charity promised housing, and Mabel pledged free meals. Harry clutched Clara's photo, whispering, They see me now, Clara! For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of a future, fragile but real. As the courtroom emptied, a woman in her 40s with tear-streaked cheeks pushed through the crowd, her voice trembling. Uncle Harry? She called, her eyes searching. Harry turned, his breath catching as he recognized Hannah, Clara's niece, whom he hadn't seen since the funeral 5 years ago. She'd been a teenager then, but now she was a woman, her face a mirror of Clara's, same brown eyes, same gentle smile. "I've been looking for you," Hannah said, pulling him into a hug that felt like coming home. "We thought you were gone." Harry held her tightly, the warmth of her embrace melting the ice in his heart. "I didn't want to burden you," he rasped, his voice thick. "Your family," Hannah replied fiercely, stepping back to reveal a young girl, her daughter Lily, 6 years old, with Clara's curls. "This is your great niece." Harry knelt, tears streaming as Lily hugged him, her small arms a balm to his wounds. Outside, the sun climbed higher, melting the snow into shimmering pools, a sign of renewal. Judge Alice approached on the courthouse steps, her coat flapping in the breeze. "My father spoke of you," she said, her voice thick. "You saved his life in Korea. I owe you mine." Harry shook her hand, the gesture heavy with history. The Veterans Legal Alliance secured Harry's back pay, $210,000, and enrolled him in a veterans housing program in Duluth. A local doctor offered free care, diagnosing pneumonia and malnutrition, while a service dog, Rusty, a golden retriever, was donated by a veterans group, his presence a steady comfort. The town rallied, Mabel's Diner hosted a fundraiser, and Emily Hart organized a support group. Hannah insisted he move in with her family, a small house on Cedar Lane, where Clara's old quilt waited. That night, Harry sat by the fire, Rusty at his feet, Hannah and Lily beside him, and pulled out Clara's photo. "I'm home, Clara," he whispered, tracing her face. The warmth of family, the promise of care, and Duluth's newfound respect wrapped around him like a blanket, a redemption he'd never thought possible. 3 months later, Duluth transformed for a ceremony called Winter Valor Day, held in the town square under a crisp February sky. Banners fluttered in the wind, children waved small flags, and local businesses set up tables with hot cocoa, pies, and roasted chestnuts. A school choir sang patriotic hymns, their voices carrying over the crowd of veterans, families, and townsfolk. Harry stood on the stage, his new coat pressed over his dress uniform, the Legion of Merit and Purple Heart gleaming on his chest, a stark contrast to the broken man he'd been. The crowd erupted in a standing ovation, the sound a warm wave through the square, a recognition he'd thought impossible. Judge Alice presented him with a plaque. "For unseen valor, Duluth honors Harold Lynch." Harry gripped the podium, his hands steady, the weight of eyes upon him both humbling and uplifting. "I didn't fight for glory," he began, his voice rough but clear, "or for thanks. I fought because you don't leave your men behind. But coming home, you hope someone remembers, and you did." The crowd fell silent, 1,000 hearts united, the air thick with emotion. He paused, his gaze drifting to Hannah and Lily in the front row, then to Emily and Mabel, their smiles a testament to his rebirth. "This town gave me a second chance," he said softly, "and I'll never forget it." The applause resumed, a wave of gratitude that washed away the years of neglect. Afterward, Harry sat on a bench in the square, Rusty dozing beside him, Hannah and Lily chatting nearby. Children played, their laughter a melody of hope, while the flag above the square waved gently, casting shifting shadows. He pulled out Clara's photo, her smile as vivid as ever. "We made it, Clara," he whispered, tracing her face. The first stars blinked above, and Harry felt the warmth of a community that had claimed him, a hero no longer invisible, his redemption complete under a sky that promised brighter days.